Good afternoon, folks. We're going to get started because we've got a full bill today and want to make sure we've got plenty of time. My name is Patrick Murphy, and I'm the Research Director at the Public Policy Institute of California. And I'm here to welcome you today and also to tell you to turn off your cell phones, of course. So let me do that right away. We're excited. We've got two reports that deal with K-12 education. I just want to sort of set things up a little bit, and then we'll get right into it. For those of you who are not familiar with PPIC, we're an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit policy think tank that's located in both San Francisco and Sacramento. We've been around about 20 years. We try to do this chance to share our findings with you on a regular basis. But of course, if you're interested in additional work that we've done, I encourage you to go to www.ppic.org and check us out there. There's a lot more there. Also, today's briefing is part of the James Irvine Policy Briefing Series, and we would like to thank them. They are the ones that make all this possible, including the nice lunch you're eating. And then in terms of setting this up, this is a little bit different than things we've done in the past. We're doing a classic double header. We have refrained from substituting hot dogs and Cracker Jacks for the meal. I think you'll appreciate that. But we decided we had two pieces of research that were coming out at similar times, and so why not put them together and get a little bit of an overlap. So the way we're going to work it today is that Laura Hill is going to be talking about the first findings in terms of high needs children in the first round of SBAC tests. She's going to present, and then we'll have Q&A around that. And then Professor Julian Betts is going to come up, and he will talk about the sort of early findings in terms of the new graduation requirements for San Diego Unified, which a number of other school districts have started to look at, and some have done as well, and take a slightly different take. And then we'll have Q&A on that. Couple of things on sort of the structure of this. Some of you may have just come for the first part or whatever. Great. If if you're done with that, if you could just sort of quietly leave. If you're going to leave, please do it quietly. We understand that happens. But just respect for the others. And then also, in terms of questions, we have Q&A set up for both of them, but both of our presenters, and we've got one co-author here too, will be around afterwards too. So if you don't get a chance in the large group question and answer setting, please feel free to stick around, and they will make themselves available for that. So again, I thank you for coming, and with that, I will turn it over to Laura Hill.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for coming to game one here, doubleheader. I'm going to be talking about the first year that the Smarter Balance have been administered to all the students statewide that take the Smarter Balance in any given grade. And we're focusing today on high need students, so those students who are English learner or economically disadvantaged. And this work is co-authored with Iwanze Ugo, who's here with us today. And there is my title slide. Okay, so this is the first time that these tests were administered statewide. There was a pilot test a year before, and this is the first time that we're really getting a look at how all of the students are doing with the Common Core. Common Core is also a new set of standards. It's been unevenly implemented according to some other research, and we also expect that the Common Core is going to be more rigorous in many ways than the past standard that we measured with the CST. We think that the English language arts standards and then the assessment are more rigorous, and that also the math is requiring now a lot more English language arts as part of the standards and part of the assessment itself. And because the standards are different, the test is different, the type of administration of the test is different, there are lots of reasons why we want to exercise caution when we compare old test results from the CST to the new test results from the Smarter Balance. And in fact, education agencies are prevented by law from doing that in California. But lucky for us, we are not an education agency, and so we're going to be doing some careful comparisons of these results. We'll talk about that today. So the reason why, despite the fact that there's a law, that we think this is a useful and important thing for us to do is to call some attention to these new results in a careful way, is that the new local control funding formula, or somewhat new local control funding formula, and the local control and accountability plans that go along with it require information at the district and school level for locals to make the right choices about how they spend their money and what kinds of programs they use. So these results are one piece of the puzzle they might be considering when they're trying to make evaluations about how things are going. And in particular, the LCFF and LCAP target high-need students, the economically disadvantaged or low-income, which are free and reduced price meal students. It also incorporates foster youth, and they also target English learner students. So districts and schools really need to know how these students are doing. This is not only for the LCAP measures, but also for the new accountability measures that are being developed at the state level, and also in response to whatever is going to come with federal requirements. And we have a very clear stated goal that working to close the achievement gap between these high-need students and other students is something that we need to be worrying about. So that's why we're going to be comparing these results. Overview of what we're doing is, first of all, an overview of the results at the state level. Then we'll talk about things at the district and the school level and talk about some implications from the first year. So here we go, first year assessments results at the state level. This is fourth grade English language arts. Smarter Balanced results are in the teal or the blue, and the CST results are in orange. As I said, the Smarter Balance was first administered statewide in 2014-15. The last time we had the CST was in 2012-13. And you can see from just a quick glance at the height of the bars that scores are lower when we talk about meeting the standard with the Smarter Balance as compared to being proficient with the state, with the CSTs. And that's true for every major student population in the state. Not unexpected for all the reasons we already discussed, and not unique. California is not the only state in which this happened. So we want to get deeper into these and understand a little bit more about what's going on and provide some useful information to the state, to districts and schools. And we don't want to spend a lot of time just doing these kinds of comparisons. We want to have some benchmarks that make it a little bit more relevant. So that's the way we think we're adding some value to making comparisons in a meaningful way instead of just continuing to say, oh, the test is harder or the standards are more difficult. So in our next slide, the benchmark we're going to use is we're going to be talking about gaps in test scores for high-need students relative to white students. So let me step you through this. This is, again, fourth grade English language arts and math, which I see now we have both on the one axis, but ignore ELA over in that little corner. It's both math and English language arts. The top set of bars is for economically disadvantaged students, and the next set of bars is for English learners. So what we see here is if we're talking about the share of students that score proficient on this exam, when we were talking about the CST and economically disadvantaged students, there's a gap between economically disadvantaged students and white students of about 22%. Then with the new test, the Smarter Balance, we see that gap is larger now. It's nearly 60%. Towards the bottom set of rows or bars across the screen, those are the English learners, and we see, in each test, each group economically disadvantaged and English learners, the size of the gap is larger with the Smarter Balance than it was with the CST. But one thing I really want to point out here is now the gap for math and English language arts for English learners with the Smarter Balance is about the same size. Whereas in the past, you could really see that English learners were struggling more with the ELA exam, not so much the math. So we think this suggests that, indeed, for English learners, now that the Common Core standards require more English language arts in math, we see that evidence here in the growth of their gap between English learner students and white students. I want to move now to talking about district scores. And one important reason to do this, to talk about things at the district and the school level, is the local control funding formula and the accountability plans really require districts to be aware of how their things are going for their students. And also, we don't have a ton of technical assistance yet in place for districts and schools to figure out how to improve things. And one method might be looking at other similar districts. So we want to provide some of that information to districts and schools through this kind of analysis. So we're going to look at a different way of benchmarking here. And there is a lot for me to tell you about this graph. So I will talk about this slide for a while. And if there's anyone that has a quick clarifying question about the graph, please stop me and I'll do that. So here what we want to understand is what's going on at the district level. We don't want to compare test scores and say, well, in Palo Alto, the high need students are doing really well, and in East Palo Alto, they're doing really poorly. Those are very different kinds of school districts. So we want to do something different where we kind of control for basic demographics at the district level and compare like schools to like schools. So that's the overriding goal. That's the benchmarking that we're doing in this particular graphic. What we see here is that as the share of high need students at a school district increases, the share of students that are scoring proficient or better or at standard or better falls. And that's what these lines, the solid lines, are showing you. So the orange solid line shows you that relationship with the CST. The blue solid line shows you the relationship with the smarter balance. So the same thing is happening with both of these kinds of tests. Then the shading around those solid lines that kind of arcs away in both the orange and the blue captures about 70% of school districts. Then the dots outside those shading areas show us the schools that we're kind of interested in, or the districts rather that we're kind of interested in this analysis, which are the ones that are kind of compared to peer schools outperforming. So we take, at the let's say the 90% of the schools that are high need. The orange line for the CST would show us, on average, how high need students are faring with the test. But you see, if you keep going up, there's some districts that are above our shading. They're kind of outliers or school districts that are doing better than we would expect. So we're interested in these schools, both the top performers, or districts with both the bottom performers and the top performers. Those are highlighted in orange and blue for the CST and the SBAC. Then there's one more feature of the graph, which are the vertical lines that you see connecting some of the dots. And those are districts that are top performers on both tests. So if there's a vertical line connecting dots, those are districts that did well on the Smarter Balanced and on the CST. So of our top 20 districts on the Smarter Balanced, 6 of them were also top performers on the CST. Of our bottom 20 performers on the Smarter Balanced, 5 of them were also bottom performers on the CST. And our technical appendix to our report lists 50 top performing and bottom performing districts and talks about the overlap in detail between those two lists. So we wanted to explore the overlap a little bit more. Here we're looking at the districts of the top 50 Smarter Balanced performers and want to see how they did generally on other kinds of tests, both the CST and the Smarter Balanced math. So the orange slice here tells us that of the 50 top Smarter Balanced performing districts, slightly more than a third performed only well on that test. They didn't also perform well on the CST ELA or the Smarter Balanced math. But about 30% of these Smarter Balanced top performers also performed well on the CST ELA, and this is for economically disadvantaged students. Then, if we want to think about the CST math, the Smarter Balanced math, it's more like 58% of these top performers also did very well on the math portion of the same test, the Smarter Balanced. When we do the same thing for English learners, we actually see that being in a top performing district as an English learner there's more overlap. So only 14% weren't top performers on other tests, but about 58% were top performers on the CST ELA, and 73% were top performers on the CST, on the SBAC math, rather. So there is a fair amount of overlap, not complete. It's not, a one-to-one relationship. Just because you did well on the Smarter Balanced doesn't mean that you used to be doing well on the CST, but there are some districts that did well in both cases. What we don't know from our research at this point is why that is. Did these districts have something that worked in both cases, or did these districts that were very successful with the CST have a good sense of what they needed to do to prepare their students for the Smarter Balanced? These are kinds of questions that our paper doesn't answer, but it does suggest where you might go looking to try to figure out these answers. So now we'll do the same thing for schools, get into the details about how English learners are doing at school level and high need students are doing at the school level. And here's a similar graph, but this time we're talking about economically disadvantaged students at schools. Same general relationship holds. As the share of free and reduced price meal students goes up at a school, the share that are scoring at proficient or scoring at the standard does go down. And we have the same outlier analysis where we look at the schools that are top performers or bottom performers, and we see that it's something like 4 of our top 20 schools on the Smarter Balance are also top 20 on the CST. And when it comes to bottom performers, it's about an overlap of 3 different schools. And again, our technical appendix has many more schools and lists them and tells you what county they're in and all of that. For English learners, actually I'm going to back up here. I do want to point out that for free and reduced price meals, and when we're looking at the school level, you see that there are many schools in which no economically disadvantaged student met the standard on the Smarter Balance. That's what's going on with these dots on the bottom. And when we looked at English learners, we had many more instances where that was the case. So a graph like this wouldn't have been as useful. So instead we break it out into schools that are doing really well, and we list them in the paper and we list them in the appendix, and then we have a different way of talking about schools that are doing less well, and we'll show that to you in a minute. But let me just take you through this little table. So there are plenty of schools where English learner students are exceeding expectations relative to their peer schools. This is a list of the top 5 schools for the Smarter Balance and the top 5 for the CST. And let me just explain how this chart works. So in Los Angeles, New Hall Elementary had about 52% of their students actually met the standards on the English Language Arts portion of the exam, which is much, much higher than the state average and much higher than we would have expected based on their demographic profile. On the other side of the table, I want to draw your attention to Robert Louis Stevens Elementary in Sonoma. So they were second from the top in terms of exceeding expectations compared to similar schools. And they also appeared on the top 10 list. So if we could fit the rest of the rows here, you would see them a few rows down on the Smarter Balance side as well. And just as an example, their demographic profile is something like half of their students are English learners, which is double the state average, and 75% of their students are free and reduced price meal, which is considerably above the state average, and 70% or 75% of their students are Latino. So this is not an example of a school that has it easy with English learners necessarily. They have a lot of them, they're low income, they're not all children of college professors like you might have at a great school in Palo Alto, and they're doing very well with them on both tests. So we don't know the details of what's going on in that school, but this is just a potential exemplar of, a school that has it together when it comes to this test and might prove to be a useful peer school for another situation. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, when we talk about English learner schools that are vastly performing when it comes to underperforming when it comes to their English learner population, we found that there are over 740 or about 740 of these schools statewide. And they're highlighted in orange on this map. So these are schools in which none of the English learner students are meeting the state standard. And there are a few counties where this is a larger problem. Madera and San Joaquin County, about 30% of their schools have no English learner students meeting the state standard when it comes to English language arts in the 4th grade. And that 740 schools translates to about 21% of schools statewide. Now I'll talk about the implications. So some districts and some schools have had a great deal of success relative to expectations compared to peer schools when it comes to both their English language learner scores and their economically disadvantaged students. This might be the case on both the Smarter Balanced and the CST. So there are plenty of places to look for schools and districts to understand what might be working. But there are many schools and a few districts where no free and reduced price meal students, and even more so, no English learner students met the state standard. And this shows us we kind of have a very long way to go if we're talking about the new state standards and where we want our students to be. And I think it has the potential to be very impactful in a potentially negative way for reclassification. We know that this test, the CST, replaces a test. The Smarter Balance replaces the CST. The CST was a key requirement for reclassification. In the past, when we looked at 4th grade English language arts scores for the CST, we found that about 45 to 64% of English learner students met the reclassification requirement from the CST. But if we look with the same analogous requirements for the Smarter Balanced, the share of English learner students that are meeting that threshold falls to about 16 to 26%. So it's a big deal, and it's not, doesn't mean it's set in stone. This is the time that the state and localities are thinking about what reclassification standards could look like. This shows you what would happen if no change was made. But the background, the fact of the matter is that the standards we're quite far from for English language learners in this first year. And if we don't think hard about what we want from reclassification, we'll have many fewer students who will be eligible to be reclassified. So we think this is a great time to have looked at these scores. It's low stakes, really, at this point, because there are not accountability or punishments things built into the system. So it's a great time for schools and districts to understand how they're doing relative to other peer group schools. We do think that there's lots of opportunity for more research and technical assistance to be provided, maybe from county offices, from this new organization, the California Collaborative for Excellence in Education, which is the CEEE. And then also the core districts are doing some interesting things where they're matching, doing peer-to-peer kinds of district and sometimes I think even school matching. And we think there's reason to think this could be a useful way for school districts and schools statewide to proceed. So I'll conclude the presentation part with that and see if there are any questions. Yes? Oh, sorry, there's a microphone coming. I'm supposed to wait for you. Yeah, thanks.
So for English learners, I was wondering if, so do English learners tend, after a certain number of years, do they tend to be reclassified? And if they, as I guess, English proficient, and then if they do, is there any data on whether they continue to show a deficit relative to other students, or if they tend to catch up at that point?
Our earlier work and some work that we worked on with Julian Betts, who's here today too, shows that English learner students are one of the most common grade levels to be reclassified is like 4th or 5th grade. And that English learner students who are reclassified are very strong academically. In some districts, depending on how they design their reclassification policies, some English learners actually, reclassified English learners actually outperform native English speakers. In other districts, they're kind of on par with the average native speaker. And it appears to us that once they're reclassified, they don't lose ground. You know, they stay really strong performers. So it is tricky when you're talking about English learners. You always have this group of students from whom the best of them are getting siphoned off and put in a different population. So it will almost be definitionally the case that English learners are going to have lower outcomes because we are taking the top part off. Patty. Oh, sorry, microphone is coming.
Did you guys look at other grades in terms of the gap? And I'm particularly interested in the 10th the 11th grade because of the potential implication. If the growth in the gap persists across the grades, I'm interested in how the 11th grade SBAC as a replacement for the EAP could impact those students in terms of college remediation and course placement.
We looked more in detail at the 8th grade, not the 11th grade. Someone sitting very close to you in the audience, Jake, might be able to help you out with that question. I know he wrote a blog about the 11th grade results in the EAP, and I suspect there's more in his head than was in the blog. So, yeah. Okay. I'll take your question, but I'm going to wait for the microphone this time.
Will you be able to follow individual schools and even individual students over time to see if there is some sort of effect, for instance, going through a K through 12 district where you end up having students be in one type of elementary school and then a different type of middle school and a different type of high school?
We don't have the individual student level data. That's certainly something that districts on their own, they all have the data. Some districts have more or less capacity to analyze that data. The state has all of that data, and I don't know what their plans are. We can, and we're trying to decide kind of now what we will do with the second year results. Look, we can follow individual school results. We can look at fourth graders over time, which gives you a new set of cohorts, or we can look at fourth graders 1 year and then fifth graders a year later. Those will be overlapping students. They won't be completely uniformly the same children, but we can do those kinds of things, and we're thinking about how to go next, what to do next. Any more questions? Yes.
Can you say a few words about how the gap is calculated?
Sure.
There was an example in the handout that puzzled me.
Okay.
It said, well, perhaps you can take it fresh, but the example in the handout said if one group has 15% that meet the standard, and the second group has 10% that meet the standard, then the second group has a 50% gap shortfall.
Yeah.
And why is it not 33?
Well, you take it off the base is 10.
Suppose it had been 10% for one group and 30% for the other group. Would it be a 200% gap?
It would be, if you're going off of the 10 group and you're going to the 30s, it would be 70 over 10, so 70% gap. If I did that right. I'm not super great at math on my feet in front of 180 people.
Okay, I'm puzzled.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm happy to do more math afterwards, if that would help.
When you guys were conducting the study, did you look at the type of accessories that were being used? For example, I know in Contra Costa County, most of the English learners tend to use iReady, in addition to ST Math, to augment some of their deficiencies.
Yeah.
Did you guys look at the type of applications?
We didn't have that in our data. I think that's a great question. We were asked that in an earlier meeting that we had today. We don't have the answers. I guess I heard that there was a report about that with regard to the CST, but as far as I know, there wasn't a comprehensive report about that for the Smarter Balance. I have seen some newspaper articles that suggested the accommodations, and in the case of this district where they were doing the interview, and I don't remember the name anymore, that the accommodations weren't great, that there were problems. So that is something that could change next year, because there was a pilot, but this was the first year. So the second year, if we see great growth for English learners, that could be one reason why, if they did a better job with those. Sure.
Yeah, hi. Interested to know if you did any analysis of sort of the higher performing schools on Smarter Balanced or the lower performing schools on Smarter Balanced, if in fact those schools and or their districts had adopted instructional materials aligned to the new standards.
We did not do that. I think that's an important next thing for whoever takes this on, if it's us or someone else. And it could even be in the works now in a different organization. And we did, in a meeting we had earlier today, someone said I recognize those schools, many of them did have some special instructional plan. It's a good question.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the current graph. The three groups are economically disadvantaged, English learner, and then at the bottom there's percentage relative to white students. So are these three groups considered to be mutually exclusive?
Nope, they are not mutually exclusive. That's a great question. Economically disadvantaged students can be white. English learner students can be white, although less so than economically disadvantaged students. And English learners and economically disadvantaged students are definitely not unique groups. Estimates suggest maybe 75 to 80% of English learners are economically disadvantaged.
So would you say overall our students aren't meeting the Common Core state standards then?
Many fewer are meeting the Common Core state standards than met the old standards. That's true.
Okay, thank you.
I think we might make our transition. Are you coming up, Patrick? Okay. Thanks very much. And I will be around afterwards.